We are now going to build on our basic PHP app example by adding the ability to retrieve the user's email address. To do this, we'll need to ask the user for permission to retrieve their email address and send them email. Regardless of whether we actually intend to send them email, we still need the permission to retrieve their address. So we'll start off by opening the index_php.php file saved in the last example. And then we'll move down to the getLoginURL function call, and just before the specification for redirect URI, we will add one more array element, scope, with a value of email publish stream. While the object of this example is to retrieve the email address, by putting in both the email and the publish stream permissions, you'll see how you can separate permissions by separating them with a comma. By specifying the scope element of the array to getLoginURL, we will tell the OAuth2 authorization and authentication process that we want to request extra permissions from the user, and that the positions that we want are email and publish stream. Once the user has approved these permissions and granted them, the user profile object already being retrieved by the me API call will now return the email address also. If you think back to the example where I showed you the Graph API Explorer and the basic data displayed and then granted extra permissions, you'll remember that the data returned automatically showed my hometown and location after I'd granted the right extended permissions. The same will happen here, and we will then be able to access the user's email address. If we go down to the end of the list of variables which we're defining, we can add an email variable and populate it with the email property from the user profile returned. Okay, now we have the email address. Let's move down. And just after we display the username, let's display the user's email address by echoing out the email variable. Okay, so let's save our script. Move back over to Facebook and run the app again. One thing you'll notice is that we don't see my email address. The other thing you'll probably notice is that we didn't see a prompt for extended permissions. Here's something that the PHP SDK doesn't do for you. It doesn't check to see if the permissions you are requesting are equal to the permissions already granted to the app, and automatically prompt the user to grant any further permissions you've added since the app was first added to their profile. In the next example covering the JavaScript SDK, you'll see that the JavaScript SDK differs in this respect. But for PHP code, you will have to add code yourself to check the permissions the user has already granted and compare them with the permissions you now require, and then prompt the user to log in and authorize again if those permissions have changed. In the companion book to this course, you'll find code examples from my colleague Neil showing you how to do this using FQL to retrieve data from the Facebook permissions table for the user. This is a good option for production apps should there be a possibility they'll change in the future. But for the time being, however, we'll adopt a different approach for testing our applications. The approach we're going to take is to go to Privacy Settings, to go to Edit Your Settings for Apps and Websites, select the app, click Remove App, and actually remove the PHP course app. Going back and running it again will then cause the app to act as if we're adding it for the first time. The app will then prompt for the permissions we've requested, the ability to send email, and the ability to post to my wall. If I click Allow, the app will then return and will display my email address. So you now have a working framework for any PHP-based Facebook application which requires extended permissions, not much different from the basic sample, the only difference being the need to pass the scope parameter and the required permissions into the getLoginURL function. This code will form the basis of all of our PHP examples from now on, and we'll see how to work with other Facebook data and PHP SDK functions as we move on through lessons in this course. After taking you through the JavaScript SDK extended permissions example, we'll then return to look a little bit more into sessions, and we'll look at the significance of some of the information we've been tracing out here in our debug trace of the request parameters.